Spotify came out with its second quarter earnings result this morning. The company missed on expectations and gross margins, even as the music streaming giant saw a jump in premium subscriber users and monthly active users. Let's bring in now Mark Mulligan, the MIDiA Research Managing Director, to dig into these results and see what they mean for the company and the streaming music space. Great to see you here again. And could you just give me your first blush after looking at these at this release?
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me on. So I think the first thing is you have seen really consistent, strong user growth from Spotify over the last sort of outperforming the market for the last year. It's increased its market share. It's, for such a mature market to carry on finding pockets of growth. So from a user perspective, Q2 saw a continuation of that incredibly strong growth, over 500 million users in total. Roundabouts like 27% or so year-on-year growth in terms of total users, about 16-17% year-on-year growth in subscribers. All that stuff is great. What is less positive is the fact that ARPU has been declining. Why is ARPU been declining? Because fundamentally, so much of that growth in this relatively mature market in Western countries is really being driven by emerging markets. So we're talking about Asia Pacific, we're talking about Middle East and North Africa, Latin America. These markets are driving users, but they're spending less. That's pushing ARPU down, which is meaning that revenue is becoming a bit decoupled in terms of growth from users.
So let me get this straight. If most of the incremental revenue, at least the changes, the growth is coming from international, what does that say about the domestic market here in the U.S.? The CEO has had his eye on a lot more than just streaming music. You can go back to interviews before the pandemic even. Is he missing the mark? Is this just a pivot to a different strategy?
So first of all, when we look at the US market, the US music streaming market is incredibly mature. It's by far the biggest in the globe, absolutely towers above any other major streaming market globally. But the growth there is coming to a close. The strong period of growth. So Spotify is really, not doing anything different from the rest of the market there, which of course makes all of these new revenue streams like podcasts and audiobooks so much more important. And clearly podcasts has been growing really well in terms of users, really well in terms of catalog, really well in terms of user engagement, but the revenue generation has been slower. So I think we want to contextualize this in a bigger story, is the next couple of years for Spotify is essentially going to be telling the markets, back us for another growth story. You've had the growth story in music, now back us for a longer term growth story about podcasts, audiobooks, and all the other things which they want to build around in terms of the broader proposition of what Spotify can be.
So am I reading this right, that they're counting on the ecosystem to add value to the podcast segment, and that they can therefore monetize it a little bit better? Is that where they're going? Because they spent, by my count, over $1 billion on people like Joe Rogan, the Obamas, Prince Harry, the Kardashians, et cetera.
Yeah, I think I would look at sort of Joe Rogan as really sort of Spotify's House of Cards moment. It was overspending to get something really big to say, we're here, we've arrived. And I think they're moving on from that now. They've made a commitment to not wanting to overspend for podcast content anymore, and really looking at how they can drive a much more diversified and essentially more organic podcast market. Spotify is the number one platform globally in terms of audience share. So it's got itself really well established, and it still has only converted a minority of its total music base to podcasts. So I think there's a huge amount of ecosystem play to be had there. But ultimately, the thing that will drive the revenue success of podcasts for Spotify is the wider market share. We basically need more of those big advertisers who are still spending big on radio to start making their move into podcasts, to start shifting their budgets there. That is when we will start to see the revenue shift.
All right, so that sounds like a structural shift, not something that's dependent on the cyclicals in the economy. How do they get there, or are they already on their way and it's just a matter of continuing to execute?
Yeah, they're certainly on the way, and as you can tell by my lack of hair, I've been in this role as an analyst for many, many years now. And I remember very similar shifts happening when we first saw the shift to online advertising, to mobile advertising, to social advertising. Essentially, what happens there is a long lag period where the big advertisers sort of only dabble, experimenting with smaller parts of their budget, and then finally there's a tipping point at which everybody starts jumping in like lemmings following the first one over the cliff. That moment will come sometime in the next couple of years. Spotify's positioned itself to be at the front of the queue. So I think, yes, it is. There is a bit of cyclicality in it, that the ad market is a bit softer at the moment than it has been. But fundamentally, they're waiting for the secular shift and to ride the wave.
We got time for another one. So could you please talk to me about the company culture? I remember when they pursued their direct listing, they specifically did not want to go the traditional IPO route. They didn't really need the money, so they didn't take it. And they came to market in a way through a direct listing that avoided a lot of the IPO foibles, I guess, that pop up from time to time. Also a European country. What is the company's ethos, and how does that guide their decision and the things that we're seeing play out with the company today?
So I think you can take this as a strength or a weakness depending on your perspective. But I think one of the things that Spotify has managed to be able to keep at its core culturally is very much a sort of startup mentality, even though it is far beyond being a startup now. So it has a huge amount of innovation. It is very ideas driven. It is always, it follows a sort of a bets mentality according to the things it's trying to pursue. It's always trying to innovate and, try out new things, immersing itself in evidence, really pushing, trying to push the envelope. And many of those things don't see the light of day. It's always almost like this, perpetual skunk works at play. Yeah. So that culture of innovation, I think, will serve it well as it, sort of essentially tries to move into a whole set of new markets.
Got to leave it there. Really appreciate your insights. MIDiA Research Managing Director Mark Mulligan.